I'm Felipe Ortego, and I was born in Blue Island, Illinois. And my folks were coming back from having Pig Beach in Minnesota, and they stopped. I guess I couldn't wait, and so they stopped in Blue Island, Illinois, where my mother had a brother who lived there at the time. And that's where I was born, and then after, I don't recall anyone tell me how long we stayed there, but soon thereafter we headed back to San Antonio. That's where we lived. That was our home base, and continues to be where my family is, my mother's family.
Okay. So, so you grew up mostly in San Antonio?
In San Antonio. Well, in San Antonio until before the war, and then since the war, I've only worked once in San Antonio. The problem I've had with San Antonio is the cedar. The cedar. I've got big allergies to the cedar.
Me too.
So I go there when it's non-cedar time.
Okay. So you went to school in San Antonio?
I went to elementary school and middle school, but I only went to the ninth grade. I dropped out of. By the time I got to ninth grade in 1943, actually it was 1942 that I started the ninth grade, and I should have been in the 11th grade, ready to graduate in 44, but I was held back for a year in first grade because I spoke only Spanish, and then I was held back again in the fourth grade because I didn't quite get the hang of English language. So I was 2 years behind everybody else. So in 1943, I was 17 in 1943. So I joined the Marines and did not finish school. So I still don't have a high school diploma or GED, but I went on to do a PhD in English.
Overachieving.
Yeah.
And the schools that you went to,
Well,
were they segregated?
Yes, they were segregated in San Antonio. They were in San Antonio, 1932 when I started school there. There were three tracks. There was the white schools, the black schools, and then one was called the Mexican/Indian school. I don't remember any Indians in San Antonio in 32, but now I imagine there must have been some. And that was the state of the schools there. And then after the war, I went to. After the war, I was fortunate to get an admission at the University of Pittsburgh, and that's simply because Chancellor Fitzgerald, in 1945, about when the war ended in August, he declared that any veteran would be welcome at Pitt, regardless of their academic background. And that's how I got there in 48. I got out of the service in 46, but went to Pitt in 48 and was there from 48 to 52.
And were you on the GI Bill?
Uh-huh, yeah. Oh, if it hadn't been for the GI Bill, I know I couldn't have made it.
Okay, so 1943, you say you joined the Marines.
Yes, uh-huh.
What did you particularly choose the Marines to be in, or did that come about?
Well, actually, that's strange because in 42 I tried to pretend I was of age and get in the service, and the Army quickly. Hello. Yeah, Gilda. I'm I'm here in Mario Barrera's room in I'm in Mario Barrera's room on 1517? 1536. How about if I meet you at noon down in the ball at the luncheon? Okay. Unfortunately, no. I'm in Mario Barrera's room, 1537. 1536. Yeah, 1536. Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. Bye. My wife.
So you tried to join.
I did 1942, and they discovered that I was not of age. And so, having tried that, then I didn't think that in 1943 that I wanted to try the Army again. So I was going by a Marine Corps recruiting station or a station in the post office, and they accepted me.
Just like that.
Hmm. Yeah.
I interviewed another Marine, Guy Galadon.
Oh yes, very famous
Yeah,
Marine.
he indicated that before World War II there were no Latinos in the Marines.
Um, I,
Mm.
mm, I'm not sure. I know some Marines, some Mexicanos from El Paso who were in the Marine Corps in 19 in the 20s, late 20s, and who were China Marines
Who were
in China. They had
okay.
been in China, and now that's only one. So it's possible that maybe they just didn't have a record of, or at least when Guy Gabaldon got in, that he probably was making a statement based upon what he perceived to be the facts.
Yeah, yeah, he must have gone in around the same time you did.
I think so. Maybe about 42, because he was a Japanese speaker.
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Marines basically welcomed you, would you say?
Yes, and I didn't experience any discrimination, certainly not in 43 and 44 and the rest of my years. But um, what was I going to say? Oh, the blacks were segregated, of course. Yeah. But I went on to become a platoon sergeant, so um, I've always thought that perhaps it was those experiences in the Marine Corps that gave me some measure of confidence, and then having been a platoon sergeant. But going to college was not easy. I almost failed out that first semester. But once I got the hang of it, then it was relatively easy. But I didn't go on to do a master's for many years, not till I was 40. Well, I started before I was 40, but I finished it here at the UT in '66. I got a master's with a thesis on Hamlet. For someone who didn't graduate high school. And,
You didn't have to see it in Hamlet, all right.
mm,
So let me ask you, where did you do your basic training?
I did it at Paris Island.
And how long does that generally take?
Well, in 1943, they were um, they were experimenting in the Marine Corps with shortening the basic training. But I I, I remember being at Paris Island for almost 16 weeks, and I think most of the platoons were going through basic, maybe 16 weeks. And they cut it down, I think, in 43 or 44, they cut it back to 12 weeks, and then eventually cut it back to 8 weeks. And I have no idea what the length is now.
Was it very rigorous training?
Oh yeah, extremely rigorous. Yeah, there were times when when it seemed almost intolerable, but there were a number of people who didn't make it. They just were washed out. But I was fortunate.
I'm sure you were very
Or,
dedicated.
yeah.
So what happened after basic training then?
Well, after basic training, I got a leave in December of '43, and to report back in January at the 8th and I Barracks in Washington D.C. So I went there and stayed for just a short period of time, and then was assigned to Quantico, which is a base just south of D.C. in Fredericksburg, Virginia. and then I was there for good portion of 44, and then shipped out to San Diego in the latter part of the fall of 44, and then from San Diego went to Hawaii, and then found myself in the Iwo and Okinawa region.
So from Hawaii, then you shipped out from there.
Mm-hmm.
That was like staging.
That was the staging at Oahu.
And which Marine unit were you with?
Well, I was with a number of units, but I was with a MAG unit, what they call the Marine Air Group, and I'm fuzzy on the number now, but I think it was MAG 24 or something like that. I'm surprised over the years that at information that I thought I would never forget.
And what was MAG unit? What did it do?
It was a Marine Air Group, and they flew with the Navy and on carriers, and so I guess I had a pretty easy time of it, so to speak. I mean, while I was in the theater, being on a ship and a MAG group, it wasn't quite like the grunts or the ground pounders, as we call them, who really had a really ordeal. You know.
So what was your role?
I was a machinist mate.
So you worked on airplanes?
Mm-hmm. Worked on airplanes, worked on different parts that required reconditioning. I did not work on the airplanes. I worked on the parts, and we had machine shops that I worked in.
Okay. And you said you were an aircraft carrier.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember the names?
Gosh.
By that time, the U.S. had quite a few carriers.
Oh yes, yeah.
Crashing them out of the shipyard.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I don't. You know, the only ship that I remember is the ship that name is the one that we took from Okinawa to China after the war. That was in September of 45. And I don't know why I remember the name of that ship, and that was the USS Monrovia, which was one of those, what do they call them, I guess, victory ships in those days. I didn't know what that really meant, except that now I understand that they were ships that were made out of concrete, not steel. I don't know how true that was.
I think there's a Liberty ship that's still up at anchor in the Bay Area.
Oh, is there?
It's, the USS Jeremiah, something like that.
Uh-huh.
That they use, I guess, as an exhibit to historical memento.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen. They have a big. What do they call that? I guess where they have all those ships up there in the Bay Area. I think when you drive up there, if you're driving up to Sacramento, I guess you can. They're off the bay there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were on these carriers and working on parts for
yes.
I assume that these were the planes that were like what, dive bombers?
Well, yeah, they were Corsairs. There was another designation for them. Let's see, they were the gull wings anyway, and they would fold up, and they took less space on.
Yeah. Yeah. So now these planes were used to support planes.
That's right, sure. Yeah, they supported the ground troops. Yeah. And there were a number of MAG groups that the Marines had, but most of the MAG groups operated really out of airfields that once the islands were established, and they brought in the MAG groups. Very few of the mag groups operated off of carriers. And we also had special support ships that had all the equipment that they needed to repair whatever, and so oftentimes we were not on the carriers. We were on these other ships, these support ships, like I guess they would be about the size of destroyers, but they were special ships made to handle the repair work.
And so you said you were sent, what, first to the Iwo Jima?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what happened there that you observed or that you were involved in?
Well, fearful, but mostly, I guess mostly it would be the fact that that we were constantly on alert, and we all, well, many of us were offshore. Many of us just couldn't. We could hear the firing, could hear the battles going on, but I think there were times when we weren't sure what was going to happen. Of course, by that time, by 45, early 45, it appeared that we were going to win the war, but that wasn't the case in 43, as I remember. Still, it still looked pretty dark and dim for us.
Yeah, and so the Iwo Jima operation, when was that?
February of 45. It lasted through the month and into March. Then Iwo came about April and May, and probably two of the fiercest battles in the Pacific. Yeah. So not being a ground troop, why I think that's why I survived.
So were you on ships during the whole time?
Mm-hmm.
What about after the battle?
Still stayed on ships, and there was a time when we did go shore, but mostly we were ship stationed. Yeah.
You would go on shore for what purpose?
Well, we've gone ashore to get off, get a little rest off the ships, and to set up. Actually, we set up machine shops on base, on the islands.
The base was like a U.S. what, air base, a marine base?
Yes, yeah.
Set up on the island?
On the island, yes, and that base is still. I guess we still have that base at Okinawa.
What did say in the case of Iwo Jima? What did that look like after?
Well, it looked pretty grim from my perspective where I was offshore. It looked pretty grim, and we heard the reports all the time. Yeah, so and there were times when we weren't sure that some of us wouldn't be called to go ashore. Yeah, they were the worst battles. Of course, I didn't know any of the battles before that. But
Gabaldon was on site then.
Yes, that was, yeah. And I was with, I think he was with the 3rd Marines. I don't remember.
He may have been the second Marines.
Second Marines.
I don't remember exactly. Yeah. Okay, so then.
Now we were considered as the MAG group. We were considered part of the 1st Marines, reinforced. Yeah.
Okay. So then Okinawa was after Iwo Jima.
Yes.
And that was one of the last.
That was the last. Yeah, yeah. And by that time, I was doing well as a machinist mate and had become a sergeant.
Were there other Latinos that were on the ship with you?
No, as a matter of fact, I don't recall having come across any Latino in the unit that I was in. Not even in boot camp. That's not to say that, of course, we had 500,000 Marine in the services, but I did not come across any other Latino Marines in my unit.
Yeah. probably just went to the regular army.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah. Now there were Marines in other units, but not in the unit that I was in. There were very few of us who got into those specialties of machinist mates and whatnot. But I had good teachers, and then having been a machinist in the Marine Corps, that helped me when I got out of the service and went to Pitt in Pittsburgh. Then I worked in the steel mills as a machinist.
So, just back up for a moment. So you were actually on the plant in Okinawa. I mean, you guys.
Oh yeah, yeah. Not part of any skirmish though. You know, by this time it was pretty much secured.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
What was that like being in Okinawa?
It was. I'm not sure what word. It was. In some instances it was exhilarating, you know, but in other instances fearful, you know, because it took a long time for the Marines to secure the island, and so there was always kind of the threat of lurking danger.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, the Japanese still had major.
Oh yeah, they weren't about to give up. Yeah.
A lot of troops in China as well as in.
Oh sure, yeah. As a matter of fact, when we sailed from Okinawa to China, it's interesting because the troops in the Pacific were those who had enough points to come home, that they earned points for different skirmishes and whatnot. They came home pretty quickly between between August and September, and the the rest of the troops then were divided into two forces. One went to Japan as an army of occupation, and the other went to China as an army of liberation. And so I was in that group that went to China, and arrived in Shanghai in September '45.
That must have been an interesting
It was, and then we, that is the forces, liberated the 4th Marines that had been interned there during the war, and then we moved up to let's see, from Shanghai to Beijing, Peking, Beijing, Tientsin, and then my part of the unit moved up to a place called on the Shantung Peninsula called Tsingtao, or the Chinese pronounce it Qingdao. They make that Chinese beer.
Yeah,
Tsingtao beer, yeah. And so that's where I wound up, and until we well, I guess until we secured all of that area and found all freed the Chinese and rounded up the Japanese and se me va la onda.
So the Japanese troops basically then were just turning in their weapons.
They were just turning in their weapons, yeah. And at Tsingtao, we wound up on the what had been the Japanese airfield, and so we just simply took it over as a mag unit, and were there for some time. As a matter of fact, we were there when the Chinese communists were grouping up in the northern part of China, and threatened the base a couple of times.
They did?
Yeah.
Really? Because I guess then they were still fighting between the nationalists and the communists.
Oh yes, yeah. And who could have known? Well, I had no idea what the struggle was about between the nationalists and communists. I knew who Chiang Kai-shek was, but other than that, let's see. By this time, I'm 45, 46. Because I turned 20 in August of '46, so I was still 19 years old. Not worldly at all.
Well, yeah, even so, that must have been a very, I mean, that whole experience of being in the military and then seeing other parts of the world, I mean, that probably kind of speeds up the growing up process, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, I did feel old. I've mulled on it over the years that I seem to have lost I didn't have an adolescence. Yeah. 17 until I was 20. In those 3 years, I guess I felt older, so much so that when I went to Pitt in '48, I already felt like I was an old timer, and I was just 22.
Yeah. How different do you think your life would have been if not for World War II, if you hadn't been in the Marines?
I don't know. I was not. I was not a. What's it called? I was not a. Um, well, I wasn't a bad kid, but I was not a good kid either. And so I was running around with gangs and um, warned a time or two about my behavior. And I suppose in part that contributed also to my not wanting to go back to school, being 2 years already older. Yeah. And the Marine Corps, I think Marine Corps helped me. It changed me a lot. From having a sense of invincibility, I realized just how vulnerable we really were as human beings. Yeah. But it began in the Marine Corps. I began to write, and all that then um, became reality, I guess, when I went to Pitt and discovered that I could write.
So when you were still in the Corps, what kind of writing did you
Well, I wrote descriptions of what I saw. I wrote poetry. Um, I had a chapbook of poetry published in 1952. A lot of that poetry, much of it doesn't survive anymore. But the poetry that has survived, some of it's pretty bad, but some of it's good. I was pleased with the chapbook that the New World Society produced for me in 1952. And then I had, but mostly poetry, but I had some small sketches. Today I think we would call it flash fiction, short pieces of fiction, or short pieces of prose. And I worked on the Pitt paper for 3 years, and learned the art of reportage.
Now, does the World War II project have copies of your writings from that period?
I don't think so. I think I had no contact about. I mean, I knew Maggie, but I had no contact with or no sense of what it was that they were interested in. Yeah. But I don't have any surviving material from that I wrote during the war. Yeah. Although all my papers, professional papers, are at the Benson here at UT. And I don't remember. I always kept everything. I never threw anything away, and that's what enabled me to give a sizable collection of material that I had in '86 to the Benson. And since '86, I've been contributing them papers that I've accumulated over the years since then, so that the footage is pretty large now. My papers at UT. Yeah. But most of the material is from post-World War II.
Now, since World War II, though, have you written about your experiences during that time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a number of pieces. Yeah. I had very recently I had a piece published as part of that Defend the Honor campaign, and Gus Chavez. I wrote a piece called it's called On War and Remembrance, Hispanics in World War II. And so there, I wove some details of my own experiences.
What sort of things did you write about?
In that piece, yeah, I wrote about the numbers of Hispanics, for example, that had served in World War II. Most of them were Mexican Americans, and about what it was like to serve in the Marine Corps and the Pacific, and then what I did when I came back. I hung up my uniform and went to work. And then, of course, railing against what Ken Burns' omission. Yeah. And then it was published in the San Antonio, La Prensa de San Antonio. I forget the editor's name there. But it was published in October or November of last year. And Maggie sent me a little note about it. So I've known Maggie. We've touched base, but I had no. I really didn't know what the project was about.
So Maggie learned about you through your writing, is that?
Yeah, through Gus Chavez, whom I know.
Yeah, I stayed with Gus at his place a few months ago when I was invited to San Diego to show my film.
Yeah. Yeah, he comes from a little town in Texas over there, Ozona.
So have like since that time, you must have met other Latinos that were in World War II.
I have.
Have you like compared notes with them or reminisced about that time?
I've encountered very few Mexicanos who were Marines in World War II. But I know others who were in, like, for Korea and other skirmishes since then. Yeah, and I don't know what after the war, it never seemed like anything significant. I mean, I served and then I came home, and then I went about, I suppose, establishing some line for myself in life, which turned out to be literature.
So you went to Pitt, Pittsburgh, and then, but you said you also worked as a machinist
in the mills while I was a student. Well, that was to support myself. The GI Bill was only $125 a month. And I did meet other Hispanics. Like, for example, when I was at Pitt, there were Latinos there, but they were from Latin America. They were from Spain, from other places. On reflection, I may have been among the few Mexican Americans at Pitt. Of course, a lot of the Mexican Americans did go to other colleges and whatnot, but maybe not so far north.
Yeah, probably not. So then after you graduated from Pittsburgh, what?
Well, when I was at Pitt, from 1950 to 52, I signed up for Air Force ROTC, and so I got a commission in 1952 as a second lieutenant in the Air Force Reserve. And then I went to work for, I joined an Air Force Reserve unit in 52, and but I went to work as a teacher of French, and in a high school.
Teacher of French? When did you learn French?
In Pitt. I learned French, studied Spanish literature, French language literature, Italian, and English, and read a lot of Russian literature. I was interested in literature.
because of your own writing?
I think in part, I liked writing. I sort of fancied myself as a writer. I still think of myself as a writer, but literary nonfiction. You know, I've written fiction, but I've never tried my hand at a novel. And people tend to think that, well, you're not a writer if you're not a novelist. But I've done a lot of work for from 1972 to 82. I was living then and working then in Denver, and I was associate publisher of La Luz magazine there. I don't know if you've heard of La Luz. No? Dan Valdez was the publisher, and I was the associate publisher. And we published, in fact, I helped to publish a lot of Chicanos in their first efforts from 72 to 82. Then in 82, with a group of Hispanics, we organized the National Hispanic Reporter in D.C. And so I've been sort of in the publishing and writing business for a while.
And when did you pursue a graduate
After in '53, I was teaching French at a high school, Munhall High School in Munhall, Pennsylvania, so it's a suburb of Pittsburgh. And in '53, the CO of the Reserve Unit announced that the Air Force was looking for pilots. The Korean War had kind of reduced the numbers of pilots that the Air Force had, and so he encouraged a number of us second lieutenants to apply for a flying school. So I did and was accepted and went to Goodfellow Air Force Base in Texas at San Angelo and learned to fly there. But I was already 27. I had to get a special waiver from the Secretary of the Air Force to go to flying school. I reported one day before I was 27.
That's considered old, I guess.
Oh yeah, yeah. So old that when I finished, I was not a line pilot. I was just flew for pay. Yeah. And the jet fleet was coming in about that time. Yeah, so I spent 9 years in the Air Force and came out as a reserve major.
So during all that time, I mean, you had an interest in writing.
I wrote constantly, yeah.
And you had a BA in literature.
Uh-huh.
But then,
in '58, then I was in Europe from '54 to '58 with the Air Force, and in '58 I was assigned to Biggs Air Base here in El Paso, and it's now part of the Fort Bliss, and in '58 when I came to El Paso, I was pretty much decided on getting out of the Air Force. I got out in fighting in '62, and I tell people that I left the Air Force because I realized I was never going to be Air Force Chief of Staff. And that's when I decided, '62 then I decided to pursue, and I did leave the Air Force in order to pursue graduate studies in literature and English. Yeah. If I had been an engineer, the Air Force would have paid my way to go to graduate school. So I got out in '62, went to UT and did a master's in English.
So you went to UT in Austin, did a master's in English.
And then did the PhD at Albuquerque, UNM, and finished the PhD in '71.
We're sort of contemporaries there. I finished my PhD in 1970.
Oh, yeah.
Political science.
In Texas?
No, at Berkeley.
At Berkeley, yeah. I had a lot of friends in the Berkeley area. Did you know Octavio Romano up there?
Oh, yeah. Interestingly enough, I met Octavio Romano when he was working on his dissertation.
Oh, in the early 60s.
He came down to the valley to work on his dissertation. He did folk medicine, Mexicano sort of folk medicine.
Sure.
And my father, who was a pharmacist, was one of his informants. I mean, my father basically hooked him up with people down there. Because Octavio didn't know anybody down there. And my father did. I mean, he knew a lot of people down there, including Octavio Romano was looking for curanderos,
Sure.
down there. And curanderos kind of operate under the radar, because they can get in trouble with the authorities, the medical authorities. So he wasn't having any luck, hooking up with people. But my father, because he was a pharmacist and kind of knew people in the area, so what was able to connect him to people. So I actually met Octavio Romano back then, long before I knew I would be going into academia.
Sure. Did your father know Mario Obledo?
Mario Obledo sounds very familiar.
Yeah, he was a pharmacist and was the first head of Maldiv.
Yeah, maybe he did.
Yeah. Well, I met Octavio in '66, where in '62 I started the master's program, but I also was teaching. I went to teach at New Mexico State in '64, and was there till '70 as an instructor, but still working on the master's, summers mostly. And Octavio Romano came to Cruces in '66. His wife was from Cruces, and I met him at front of the library. So we talked and became friends, and he told me about El Grito, a journal they were going to organize. So I published as part of that first wave of Quinto Soul writers with him.
What sort of things did you publish?
Well, I wrote something called The Mexican Dixon Line, The Coming of Zamora, some fiction, The Education of Mexican Americans, among the first of the pieces that began to look critically at the condition of Mexican Americans in American education.
Yes, I probably read some of your pieces during that time.
Yeah. Now, I wrote, in those years, I wrote as Felipe Ortego, because my birth certificate is Felipe, but when I went to school, they changed promptly. First year, they changed my name to from Felipe to Philip. And it stuck, and I still, all my public documents are still under Philip. But I chose, with the Chicano movement, I chose to identify myself as Felipe as my birth certificate.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you also, in connection with, obviously World War II had a major impact on your life, so that your trajectory and so forth. But I'm wondering what you may have observed as far as the impact that it had on the communities that you were living in.
The impact World War II had on me?
Yeah.
Yeah. It had, at least judging by San Antonio, it had a tremendous impact on there. Many of the vets who came back, Army, mostly Army, Navies, and of course in Texas there were a lot of Mexicanos that went to the Marine Corps. But when they came back, they were really dedicated to making changes. And in fact, that's when I first came to know about the GI Forum, for example, that was organized in '48, and by 1950, there was a chapter of the GI Forum in Pittsburgh, and I was a member of LULAC in those years, and.
LULAC had already existed before.
Yes,
since the GI Forum was formed after the war.
That's right, yeah. But and there were several LULAC chapters in Pittsburgh. The Mexican Mexican-American community in Pittsburgh was very large, larger than a lot of people realize. Between Chicago and Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which is the terminus for the Pennsylvania Railroad. Between Chicago and Johnstown, there were, my estimate is that there were probably as many as 4 million Mexican Americans there. 3.5, 4 million. And today, of course, the Mexicano community in Chicago and Michigan and Wisconsin and Pittsburgh and Ohio, very large. Yeah. Probably, I'd say a good tenth of the Mexicano community, U.S. Mexican American community, probably lives in that Ohio Valley Crescent. At least that's what I said in the book that I wrote on backgrounds of Mexican American literature.
Yeah, so you really saw a lot of changes in San Antonio.
Oh, there were very big changes, yeah, and changes that would not have been possible if it hadn't been, I think, until the 60s actually. While there were perceptible changes in the 40s and 50s, it was really the 60s that sort of changed things. Yeah, San Antonio became a hub for a lot of activism, and as you know, Carlos Guerra. You know Carlos Guerra? He's a writer for the San Antonio Express News. He and Jose Angel Gutierrez and those folks, they went to Kingsville. It was A&I, Texas A&I then, but they came to San Antonio and established their headquarters there, and Raza Unida was really sort of born between Crystal, Kingsville, and San Antonio.
So looking back on the whole World War II experience now, would you say, I mean, do you think of it kind of like in a nostalgic way, or how do you evaluate the whole?
That's a good question. I think I've tended not so much nostalgically, but I've tended to be more what's the word, more mnemonic about it. I remember more, and I'm putting more down on paper in a way that I didn't do that in the 40s, or none of the poetry I wrote in those years or 50s reflect any World War II experiences, and they don't reflect certainly a Latino consciousness. Even though I was always a Mexicano, but it wasn't until 1966 and my encounter with Octavio Romano that, and I've said so in print, that Octavio Romano made me a Chicano. It was those conversations that I had with him, those summers that he came to Cruces, and
he was probably in the process of becoming a Chicano too.
Oh, I think so. Sure. Yeah, we were all kind of percolating in that pot. But it was the best thing that happened to me. It changed my life. I was what I didn't mention is that I was at UNM. I was 3 chapters into a dissertation on Chaucer, and was asked by I forget the name of the young man who was asked to establish a Chicano Studies program at UNM. Louis Bransford. I was working on the dissertation at UNM, and I was a teaching fellow in 69 to 70. I took a leave of absence from Cruces, and he asked if I could organize a Chicano literature course, a Mexican-American literature course. And so I did, and as far as I know, it might have been the first course taught in 69 on Mexican-American literature at UNM. I'm not ready to defend it. I just think that was the first course. No one else has suggested it any differently. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when things are starting to
Yeah.
develop academically.
Sure. And as a consequence of that course, then I changed my dissertation title, project. I changed it from Chaucer. Eventually, I published all the chapters on Chaucer, but I changed it to backgrounds of Mexican American literature. And to my knowledge, that's the first literary study of Mexican American literature in the field.
When you say backgrounds, what do you mean?
Looking at how it developed, who was writing where and whatnot. Nobody had stopped. It seemed to me, nobody had stopped to consider the Mexican American cultural literary production. No one has stopped to consider it as a body. So I sought to do that in that study. Develop a taxonomy.
Yeah, from the development of major fields.
Yeah, and then I wrote a piece called The Chicano Renaissance in 1970, and that had very big play, but nobody would publish it. College English wouldn't publish it. Modern Language Association wouldn't publish it, and it was finally published in the Journal of Social Casework, of all places. Yeah. And so the piece has traveled well for me.
You know, I had a kind of a similar experience, a parallel experience, in a way, in that when I was at Berkeley working my PhD.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was, of course, no Chicano politics as a subject and so forth. And so my dissertation was actually in Latin America, in Argentina. In '69, I was in Argentina doing my research when I read an article in Time magazine, of all things, but we were very limited in what we got there, about, and they mentioned, I think they mentioned Americo Paredes, in that article, and they mentioned Ralph Guzman, if I remember correctly, and that was the first inkling that I had gotten that there was a kind of a Chicano studies, thing developing.
Sure.
And by that time, my dissertation, my research was already pretty well underway, so I went ahead and finished my dissertation on Argentina, but then I never worked in that field again. That's when I switched over to studying Chicano politics. And as a result, I was not able, the way a lot of people do, to take their dissertation and turn it into a book.
Yeah.
I kind of started from scratch again, and started working on what became my first breaking class in the Southwest.
Oh yes, I know that work. Yeah, and I know your name from.
But that kind of was sort of like what was happening to you at that time. It was sort of making this changeover from a more traditional kind of subject to a newer.
Don't you suppose it was that we had acquired we were acquiring the academic skills and tools, and then when consciousness, at least from my perspective, when consciousness hit me, I was able then to utilize those skills and tools in Chicano studies, in a field that was just emerging. Well, it changed my life completely. The chair of the Department of English, Joe Zabadil at UNM, he thought I was crazy, who does that? But he finally agreed that if I could find 3 faculty who would be willing to serve as my committee, he didn't think I could do it, but if I could find 3 faculty, that he'd approve it. So I found the 3 newest faculties, and all younger than me. Found the what time is it? That's good. Hello? Hi. Yes. Gilda.